Welcome, fighters and nerds alike. Glad to have you with me. I'm your cornerman, and as always, I'm here to help you dominate any list you step foot in. The Armored Combat League and the IMCF have always fought on one-on-one fights known as duels. These fights are fairly simple. Use the weapon to land more strikes than your opponent. Of course, I'm oversimplifying the singles fights. That's because I want to talk to you about night fights. Becoming popular in the Knights Hall in Nashua, night fights are a more comprehensive, complete test of a fighter. Strikes with weapons, fists, shields, knees, and takedowns are all both legal and encouraged. Singles matches, on the other hand, will only count with landed blows from a weapon. Both night fights and singles matches have their advantages, requiring two separate skill sets and mindsets when fighting. As more single fighters test the waters with this new fight format, and new fighters get their feet wet with this brutal match style, there are some key differences you need to know before you step into the list. Don't you worry, Buttercup. Favorite Cornerman is here to show you the ins and outs of this new fight. Let's take a look. One of the biggest issues I see among fighters is controlling the ring and subsequently controlling the fight. As we covered earlier, singles matches are purely counted blows. What night fights change is the concept of controlling the ring. Similar to MMA, the center of the ring is constantly being fought over. As fights progress, you'll see a dance around the outskirts of the ring. What this mini game accomplishes is creating control over where your opponent can go. Quite simply, taking half the field from them eliminates half their options. What this does is limit the room to maneuver, literally putting their back against the wall. This single thought philosophy is a stark difference to what typical fighters are trained when fighting a standard 5-on-5 melee or a 1v1 singles match. Having your back against the list prevents the chance from a flanker catching you from behind and taking you out of the fight. In singles, there's no penalty for having your back to the rail, although many top-tier fighters would probably advise against it. With aggression and ring dominance a factor in scoring, pinning your opponent on the list is complete domination. And dominating your opponent is what will win fights. With that in mind, let's take a look at some examples of properly using ring control and how it worked to their fighter's advantage. Our first fight is a longsword fight between two experienced fighters, CJ and Greg. Right out of the gate, the two are trading blows and are generally evenly matched. You can see Greg's grip change when he goes for a cross-check with his longsword. Something that's usually seen with an axe, but it's quite effective, driving CJ back for some aggressive points. Greg could tell that his early strikes weren't making much solid contact. Something all great cornermen should remind their fighters is to vary their offense. Charging your opponent at the right time is a critical good move, while kicks to the hip, offhand punches, and ring positioning will do wonders to put your opponent in the corner of the list. Controlling the ring and putting your opponent in the corner is great, but capitalizing on that moment is equally important. In this Titan fight, it is even more critical because you know these big boys aren't running laps to outmaneuver each other. These first few engagements were easily won by Dominic as he's just able to outpower Al. Al quickly realized he can't easily outpower Dominic, so Al switches his offense's lead with a straight kick to the hips. The rest of the round you can see Dominic starts to hesitate when engaging with Al. I would have loved to see more follow-through strikes and comboing off these kicks. Adding sword strikes would have easily given Al the win for this fight. But ultimately, it was not capitalizing on a good position that cost him this night fight. Now, if we're going to talk textbook capitalization on the rail, we need to only look to my man, Brian Girani. By my standards, one of the best night fighters currently fighting in his weight class. Watch as Brian in red controls nearly every aspect of this fight. What Brian does such a great job of is capitalizing on a pinned opponent. His style is composed yet patient. Once his opponent is on the list, He will throw a flurry of strikes, knees, some kicks to rack up some impressive strikes, and aggression on his helpless opponent. The key to dealing with enemy aggression is that Brian can redirect his opponent's aggression or even counter it with his own when he feels that he can outmaneuver his opponent to put him in a semi-vulnerable position. Now watch how Brian is put in a Muay Thai lock. Instead of panicking, he simply puts his head down, charges forward, and is able to put his opponent in a terrible position. So this brings us to the golden question. What can you do as the corner man? The big thing is knowing your fighter and knowing your opponent. Of course, the stronger fighter will generally have the advantage. If your fighter is winning the strength game, the fight becomes fairly basic. Wait for your opponent to commit, step in, and grab. Once you grab them, just force them onto the rail. Once they're on the rail, you pin them there and get some weapon strikes in. If you can't get a weapon strike in, throw some knees, start headbutting, do whatever you gotta do to rack up aggressive points. The key here is to keep the fight on the rails. Disengage sparingly and make your opponent play your game. Smaller fighters, on the other hand, sorry to say it, but you got a bit of a tougher fight. What you need to do is channel your inner matador and redirect all the aggression coming your way. When they miss repeatedly, smack themselves against a rail, and you get some shots in on your own, they'll get the message. Once they get that message, you'll be able to play the fight that you want to play. Now I think that's enough film for today. Time to get your ass back in the list. Don't hesitate to let your favorite corner man know when you need to plan for your next fight, because you know I got your back. Till next time, I'm your corner man, telling you it's time to get some.